Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from New York. And here are the stories we're following tonight, starting with new details on the Idaho murder trial. The focus in court right now is on DNA found at the crime scene, while prosecutors are also fighting hard to make this a death penalty case.
As a father, if you come after my child, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that, we come after you and we deal with somebody who, took advantage of the situation.
And it is a mess at airports on the East Coast right now. Some people are standing in lines literally overnight.
These people here are probably an hour and a half ahead of us, and we've been waiting in line for 5.5 hours.
And parents, listen up. Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are all rolling out safety measures to keep teens safe. Do they go far enough? We're going to take a look.
I don't think these apps are set up in any way, shape, or form to protect kids.
And we're starting tonight with breaking news out of Moscow, Idaho. Brian Kohlberger, the suspect accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students, was back in court just a few hours ago, and his lawyers are asking to see more information discovered by the prosecution in the case. Now, among the evidence that they want to see are training records of several police officers involved with the case, as well as FBI cell phone records. And in court today, Kohlberger's lawyer told the judge they needed those records to build their defense, especially now that the state is seeking the death penalty.
There is a heightened standard now that the state has filed its notice of intent to seek death. And these are very relevant, critical bits of information. They are discoverable, and we're asking the court to order that they be supplied to us.
Now, Kohlberger is charged with a first-degree murder in the stabbing deaths of the students at their off-campus house in November of last year. Prosecutors say his DNA was found on a knife sheath found at the scene, and that DNA connection was the big break in the case that ultimately led to his arrest. He has pleaded not guilty. Steve Patterson joins us now. Steve, was there a decision today about this evidence that the defense is requesting?
So the final answer on that is yes and no, and I'll get to why. Unfortunately, it is a little more complicated than we first thought. But essentially, as you laid out, I mean, the defense is hungry for records. They want cell phone records. They want DNA records. They want training officer records, as you mentioned, forensic data. They say all of this is pertinent to building their case, and they simply don't have enough information. So the judge essentially ruled that you'll get some of those records, but not all of them, verbally promising, based upon what the prosecution said in rebuttal, that they're still waiting on reports themselves, that once they get those reports, they will share those with the defense. Some, however, are too sensitive, and some the judge is still waiting to make a ruling on. So we may know that in a written statement in the next few days or so. There are some things that the defense was asking for that remain sealed with the grand jury. We know that the defense is hungry for those as well, and some that still have yet to be discussed, Gadi.
What about the DNA evidence that's being used by the prosecution? Did that come up at all today?
And when I said has yet to be discussed, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is, of course, as you laid out, the big break in the case. But remember, DNA was found on that knife sheath. It was traced back to Kohlberger using that genealogical DNA, the familial DNA, techniques that haven't been used in so many criminal cases. The defense really wants, again, the evidentiary findings on those, exactly how they processed those, also alluding to the fact that there were more DNA signatures from more unknown males, as the defense said, in and around the house. So they want to know if those records were tested and if those were sent to a lab and what the results from that was. All of that TBI. We're not sure yet whether or not the judge will make a ruling on that, and it didn't come up in court, Gadi.
Yeah, what comes next? When will we see Kohlberger back in court?
So next is the judge's ruling on these records. He's going to make a written statement, we think maybe in the next few days, maybe a week or so. We imagine there will be more pretrial. As mentioned, this is now focusing or comes with the death penalty. The prosecution pushing for that. I think there has to be more from the defense, more from the prosecution. This changes the nature of the case. You're essentially splitting the case off into a trial phase and a penalty phase. The defense has to do more work because of this stipulation. And and then you have the judge ruling on whether or not he's going to authorize a stay to the defense because there are all these requests for records. And the defense is also asking, hey, can you delay the proceedings a little bit so we have time to disseminate and read through all of this information? All of that is going to require probably more hearings. That's likely when we'll see Kohberger back in court. Gadi.
Steve Patterson, thanks so much. Now, this case is actually changing how police work is done across the country because there are new types of DNA technology that are being used to solve cases, and some of those cases date back decades. Last summer, we toured one lab that is working to bring justice to so many families. Again, this was last summer before this case, and this lab is now being used in the Kohberger case. Take a look at what we saw last summer.
So when it comes to your laboratory, when it comes to your tech and legacy tech, what's the main difference?
So we're taking this really challenging evidence that's historically been unusable for testing, and then we're enabling testing, and then we're doing that with hundreds of thousands of markers instead of, say, tens of markers of what you do in a traditional forensic test.
The Othram team combines medical and genomic expertise to revolutionize how forensic DNA is processed.
If you go to like one of those consumer DNA companies to learn about your ancestry, spit in a tube, and you'll generate about 1,000 nanograms of DNA. At Othram, like we work off 0.1 nanograms.
Put it in perspective. How small is it? How small are we talking?
So the equivalent would be 15 human cells. If I touch David's shoulder right now, I've left hundreds of cells right here.
Now, again, that was a look at the technology this summer before that murder case happened. Othram Labs isn't talking about this case because of the gag order, but we do want to note why this is so important. There are a lot of unsolved murder cases. In fact, the Department of Justice estimates there are more than 250,000, and that number goes up by some 6,000 new murder cases filed every year, and new technology is being used to solve those cases. And some interesting developments in that Trump secret documents case tonight. New leaked audio seems to contradict a lot of what former President Donald Trump has been saying about those classified documents. Let's take a quick listen to the recording that was leaked publicly today and talk about it on the day.
And he said he wanted to attack Iran and what? These are the papers. This was done by the military, given to me. I think we can probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to figure out
yeah. See, as president, I could have declassified. Yeah. Now I can't, but this is classified.
Now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Now, that tape is from July 2021, and here's what makes that tape so important. It's the fact that Trump has been claiming that he never had a classified document with him. Take a listen.
That was a massive amount of papers and everything else talking about Iran and other things. And it may have been held up or may not, but that was not a document. I didn't have a document per se. There was nothing to declassify. These were newspaper stories, magazine stories, and articles.
Didn't have a document per se, but on the tape you hear him say, quote, "See, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is still a secret." He even says that the military drew it up for him, implying that this is a Pentagon document. And NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley has been following all of this. First off, Ryan, what's the former president's reaction today?
Well, just now, actually, in an interview with the publication Semaphore, he claimed that this was all just bravado and that he was sort of faking about the plans, that there was not actually wasn't holding any classified documents, and that he was just sort of faking it. So that's the latest pivot from the Trump team. But this is pretty, I think, damning audio for him overall, and it'd really be a major part of the prosecution's case going forward. And I think, especially when jurors hear that and hear the various explanations, presuming it ever would get to that point, it's something that is going to be pretty tough, I think, for a defense team to rebut.
So you're basically saying that he's saying that don't believe him, he was faking it? That's the argument?
Which is a real pivot for Donald Trump, because you don't often say, hear him say, "Oh, this was all just bravado, I was faking it." But that's his new move, according to this latest Semaphore interview.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this document? It seemed to have to do with Iran. It seemed to have to do with the military. What do we know there?
We don't know a ton, obviously, because, it's still classified, right? We just know the vague sort of outlines of this. I think this is one of those documents that there's going to be a question about whether, if it gets to trial, whether that's something that will be presented directly to jurors. I think because this is such an essential document overall, that this might be one of the ones that they make central to this. Because remember, it's not just this one document. I think this is sort of illustrative in prosecutors' view of Donald Trump's general approach to classified documents and cavalier attitude towards handling these matters, despite what they cite from the 2016 campaign, when Donald Trump was running a campaign that was all about the importance of holding classified information in a secure location and making sure that you're following all of the government protocols for that. So, I think that that's something that we'll see down the line whether or not this is a document they'll make at the center of this case.
And has the DOJ said anything about this audio recording leaking?
They haven't. They've declined to comment, and generally the Justice Department, in fact, all the time has spoken through the court process here. They're not, making these sort of leaks. And I think that if you just sort of piece together the puzzle on this and consider all of the people that had access to this audio, and consider the bylines on a lot of the stories that we're seeing from this, I think readers should be able to come away with the conclusion that this is not coming from the Justice Department, which has really been by the book on a lot of these things. This would just be an unforced error for them. There's no consequences for the Trump campaign putting this audio out there, or people affiliated with the Trump campaign. Zero at all. They're allowed to do that. On the Justice Department side, there would be serious repercussions if this were ever tied to them. So just, you sort of balance the ledger, and I think, viewers can be pretty well assured that this is coming from the Trump folks.
Ryan Riley, thanks so much. And NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins me now. I don't know, Danny, what do you think? Why would the Trump campaign want this audio leaked, especially since it does refute what he was saying before this?
Yeah, there are a couple theories there. I mean, one is that Trump and his team are just so committed to their narrative, and they think that, and I've seen this with a lot of criminal defendants, they believe their version of the story is so immutable, so true, or they just believe that if they get it out, it will be believed, and maybe that's a difference. But the point is, they think they're right, and they think that every piece of evidence backs up their story, when they're a little blind to the idea that this is really bad for them by any objective measure. It fleshes out contextually what was previously only really known to us in a kind of transcript in the words on the printed page. And now we get the context. Perhaps the Trump team thinks that it seems more innocent in this context in the audio version. But I mean, the bottom line is it shows a lot of negligent conduct, a lot of cavalier attitude about very sensitive documents. And by the way, it cuts off a lot of avenues of defense for Trump by, for example, ruining an inadvertence defense, ruining an I didn't know any better, or I didn't know nothing defense. I mean, these are all defenses that Trump arguably could have offered. Now, with each new tape and each new transcript and each new set of words that come out of his mouth, either at a rally or on some tape somewhere, his defense is getting narrower and narrower.
This audio recording has been played already for the grand jury. They obviously made up their mind, but tell us, how does something like this play out in court for the Trump or from the Department of Justice?
Well, I think what a lot of people aren't talking about is that this proves what we already knew, but we just didn't know what the evidence was, which is whatever's in an indictment is only a fraction of what the government actually has. The government would never put every piece of evidence that they have into an indictment. They might prove put every fact that they plan to prove that are essential to getting a conviction, but that doesn't mean that's all the evidence that they have. And this is a great example of that. So this is just additional evidence that we didn't know about, didn't need to know about, because the government can just introduce it in its case in chief. And believe me, juries love tapes. They love video. They love audio. They can basically authenticate it themselves. They like it much more than reading a transcript. You don't get the context in a transcript that you do out of the original audio, because we don't speak the way we write. We have a lot of ums. We stop and start sentences in the middle of things. When you hear it, and I've listened to so many government recorded tapes and audio and video, it's only when you hear it that you can get the context. Reading a transcript just doesn't do it.
And Danny, a lot of people are going to hear this and think, like, Who cares? This sounds like a case over paperwork. What are the national security implications here?
Yeah, there are national security implications, and that's really what makes this case egregious. But, I mean, make no mistake about it, Trump's defense is going to be essentially that these were documents that he accidentally brought down to Mar-a-Lago, was in any rate, he was authorized to declassify them. That won't work with a certain category of documents called national defense information. The crime doesn't depend on whether or not he declassified or classified the documents. But look, Trump's best defense here is to create as much smoke as he can about whether he was authorized to bring the documents down. And then his other defense, maybe not so much legal, is to demonstrate or try to demonstrate that he's being picked on by his opponent's DOJ. And we can't discount the power of that defense, even if it may be provably false. It's something that if he gets to, I don't know, however many people in the country, those are people that could end up on that jury. And while jury selection hopefully weeds out people who are particularly biased, as long as he keeps pushing that narrative, look, he's pushed crazy narratives before, and people tend to believe them. So I don't think the government is discounting for a second the power of Trump to influence a potential jury pool with his narrative, even if it is based on a weak legal defense.
Danny Ceballos, thanks so much. And turning now to some breaking news out of Southern California. Evacuations are happening right now in the town of Paris as a brush fire is starting to spread. Now, they're calling this the Juniper Fire. It's already destroyed homes and cars. So far, the fire has burned through about 50 acres. It seems to be growing, but emergency responders on the scene are saying that fire is spreading extremely quickly. And a care and reception center for evacuees has been set up at the middle school there. We're going to continue watching that breaking story and bring you updates as they become available. And we've got much more ahead. Horrible weather all across the mid-Atlantic is causing a nightmare for travelers, myself included. I'm stuck here in New York. And with the delays and the cancellations piling up, 4th of July travel could get pretty messy.
Good luck with anybody booking tickets from anywhere else in the country.
Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the headlines that we're watching tonight. A new report investigating the death of Jeffrey Epstein says one mistake after another led to what happened, but they're still calling it a suicide. The DOJ says prison employees failed to monitor the accused sex offender in his cell. They didn't give Epstein a cellmate, and they gave him extra clothing. The coroner in California has verified that actor Julian Sands has died after going missing on a hike back in January. Hikers last week found human remains and reported it to the local sheriff. Sands was best known for his work in A Room with a View in 1985. He was 65 years old. The man has pled not guilty to a triple murder in Newton, Massachusetts. The suspect, Christopher Ferguson, was charged with stabbing and beating 3 people to death, Jill and Bruno D'Amore and her mother, Lucia Arpino. The couple was just about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And if you've got a Kia or a Hyundai, you probably know those cars are very big targets for thieves. In Minneapolis, the number of those cars being stolen is up like 800%. And a group of AGs say it's led to 8 people getting killed across the country, and they should be recalled. But federal regulators just decided they will not be recalling Hyundai or Kia vehicles that are vulnerable to being stolen. And the wheel will keep on turning, this time with a new host, Ryan Seacrest. He's set to replace longtime Wheel of Fortune host Pat Sajak when he retires after next season. Sajak took the wheel in 1981, now saying goodbye after 41 seasons. And some big storms are putting millions under severe weather threats across the country. They are also preventing a lot of people like me from going home sooner. Look at this. Here on the East Coast, parts of Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey are under flood watches. But our friends over in the plains could see some really serious wind and hail, possibly even a tornado or two. And all that severe weather isn't just stopping me from getting home today. It's actually delayed over 20,000 flights across the United States. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
On On the busiest travel week of the summer, a recipe for a travel nightmare at the center of it all, the Big Three in the Big Apple.
The plans keep changing, like literally, it's like by the minute it's changing.
Summer storms in the Northeast have led to ground stops, endless lines, and boiling frustration. NBC's Maggie Vespa stuck at LaGuardia overnight.
It's chaos down here. One woman behind me in line told me she's been told to be prepared to be stuck here until Saturday. Everybody is so stressed out. People are yelling, people are mad.
The ripple effect means long lines in Denver and Boston.
Like you get here 3 hours early and you're still not sure if you're going to make it.
Delta CEO says this summer is breaking records.
The demand, as you know, as anyone that's traveling knows, is off the chains.
But it's not just the weather slowing things down. In an email, United CEO Scott Kirby said the FAA failed us this weekend. With its Newark hub hit hard, Kirby blames the ongoing shortage of air traffic controllers for slowing traffic, though the FAA insists it was not a problem. Nationwide, more than 2,500 controllers are retiring this year and last. Training and certifying new controllers takes 2 to 3 years. And United has its own staffing problems. A union email says flight attendants are waiting on the phone for hours to reach crew scheduling. Airports nationwide reporting record passenger levels at or exceeding 2.7 million passengers every day, eclipsing 2019 numbers. Just as the TSA predicts, Friday could be the monster travel day, 2.8 million travelers. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
Tom, thanks. Meanwhile, the South is being battered by a really intense heat wave that we've been telling you about all week. Over 50 million people are under heat alerts. You can see the number of cities there that saw triple-digit highs today. Wow. And NBC's Sam Brock has a whole lot more.
From pretty much sunup to sundown, it is intense, sweltering heat here in the city of New Orleans. 120-degree heat index sounds like something should be in the middle of the desert. Instead, we're in a coastal Gulf city preparing for hundreds of thousands of people coming to town for the Essence Festival with no relief in sight.
In New Orleans' French Quarter, where long lines pack this steamboat dock as unrelenting heat is steaming the entire city.
It's really hot out here.
New Orleans could set record highs the next 4 days with the heat index approaching 120 degrees.
I saw someone about 2 weeks ago had a heat stroke, a lady out here, so it's very hot.
Was that scary to see firsthand?
Yes, it was.
The city's top priority, caring for the most vulnerable, opening at least 9 cooling centers and hydration stations.
What is the precedent for this kind of a heat wave here?
Well, this is unprecedented. Extreme excessive heats that we've never experienced before.
The fierce triple-digit temps even impacting our furry friends who went running for cover and rendering our news crew camera unusable, frying its circuits by mid-morning.
The key thing is take it easy, stay hydrated, and just use your good senses about it, man.
But it's the smoke from the Canadian wildfires to our north that's now canvassing U.S. landmarks like the Mackinac Bridge in Michigan. And briefly giving Chicago the worst air quality in the world. That smoke once again moving towards New York City. Extreme weather also tearing through Nebraska.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
In Wyoming, at least 6 reported twisters. Indiana also taking a direct hit.
I got to watch all my porch furniture go whoosh, and then all of a sudden I heard the whole house explode.
Then there's the storm surging up the East Coast from North Carolina to New Hampshire. But tonight, it's the deadly heat that continues to hold an iron grip across much of the South.
What makes this such an unusual event for New Orleans is the longevity, 5 or 6 days of this kind of intense heat. And Louisiana is hardly alone. Texas's electrical grid just broke its all-time June record for daily usage. In New Orleans, Sam Brock, NBC News.
Thanks, Sam. And the Supreme Court has handed out a surprising decision today on cyber stalking. It turns out they actually ruled in favor 7-2 of a guy accused and convicted of online stalking. Let's just break that down really quick here. A Colorado man was convicted of 1 count of stalking for sending threatening Facebook messages to a local musician. He was then sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. But today, the court said that conviction was based on the wrong legal standard, and essentially his messages did not constitute a true threat because his intentions were not clear. NBC's Nyla Charles joins us now. Nyla, explain this to us. What kind of messages was he sending, and how did she respond?
Well, the victim here, Gadi, was an up-and-coming country singer. She describes the messages as being threatening and extremely horrifying. And this happened over the course of 6 years. Thousands of Facebook messages sent to her from this person she didn't know at all, Billy Counterman. And she says over time, those messages escalated. After she would block him, he would create a new profile, and she never even responded, and those messages would keep on coming. So some of the messages that they pointed out were the fact that he would say that he would kill himself and would tell her to die, and even described her car that she drove and some of the people she hung out with. So she started to believe that she was being stalked. She got so scared, Gadi, she stopped performing. And this is someone who had nearly thousands of performances across the country. She says this entire experience for her was life-altering.
So the justices say that his messages weren't threatening. I mean, the word die was on there. What was their rationale?
Well, they're essentially saying the words weren't threatening, and they defined a true threat being that the accused person would know that their words are being perceived as a threat. And they say this case in particular didn't meet that threshold. Here, they're saying his words were a freedom of speech.
Has a musician responded?
Yeah, she has, and as you would expect, she's incredibly disappointed. This is the statement she gave to us from her attorney. It says, "I'm disappointed that the Supreme Court's decision has minimized the harms that true threats impose on their victims. If you are afraid, please reach out for help. The court's decision does not mean that victims must stand alone." And her attorney we spoke to was also encouraging victims to still come forward, even though he believes that this is really preventing the ability for prosecutors to go after people who send online threats. Take a listen.
Coles is very disappointed in the decision. She was hoping that the interests of crime victims were going to be foremost in the minds of the Supreme Court justices as they decided the case. But unfortunately, they seem to be focusing on different issues. And I think they've overlooked how difficult this may make it for some prosecutors who are pursuing stalking and similar kinds of cases.
Gadi, a lot of people are affected by online harassment. In a Pew Research study, they say 41% of Americans have been victims of online harassment, and that includes physical harassment, sexual harassment, even political harassment. So the decision made today by SCOTUS can really has the potential of affecting a lot of people. Gadi?
NBC's Nyla Charles, thanks so much. And we've got a lot more news headed your way, but first, you gotta see this. Looking for a summer vacation spot? Well, you can rent Barbie's Malibu dream house. But Barbie is away, and Ken has taken over. He's doing things his way, and he is bringing some big energy. We're talking beachfront disco parties, some cowboy flair, and yeah, you can actually rent a room through Airbnb. Come on, Barbie, let's go party. You like the color pink? Hey there, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. The man accused of killing 4 Idaho college students was back in court today. Now, the focus on the case is turning to DNA found at the crime scene and how the prosecution is seeking the death penalty. NBC News has obtained an audio recording of former President Donald Trump discussing those classified documents. And a wildfire in California is forcing evacuations right now. The juniper fire has burned through about 50 acres and is now spreading to homes in Riverside County. And the CDC is out with a new warning this week about malaria, and that is a disease we almost never see here in the United States. 4 people in Florida and 1 in Texas have contracted or have come down with malaria. It is the first time it's been caught here in the United States in 2 decades. And there are actually about 240 million cases of the disease each year, but 95% of those are in Africa. And joining us now is NBC's medical fellow, Dr. Akshay Syal. Dr. Syal, what happens when you get malaria? How bad is it?
Hey, Gadi. So there's a few different types of malaria, and so the short answer is it's going to vary on what type you have. And the kind of malaria that we're seeing now in the U.S. is called, it's Vivax malaria. And so basically, you know, when you have this one, it kind of goes into stealth mode, and it can hide out into your liver after you get infected for up to a year. But generally speaking, malaria symptoms look pretty similar to other diseases like COVID or even the flu, where you have the flu-like symptoms like fevers and chills and body aches. But what we're really concerned about is malaria, when it gets severe, can spread to the brain. It can cause kidney damage, lung damage. And so because of that, the CDC actually issued an alert yesterday telling doctors, if you see those symptoms but you don't know why, all the other tests are negative, hey, you might want to consider this.
So this can hide out for a year. Are you contagious that entire time? And how does transmission work?
So malaria is not contagious. So if I had malaria right now and I was sitting here talking to you, you wouldn't get it from me. Malaria is spread through mosquitoes. It's not spread through sexual contact. But just a little point here, you can actually spread it from mother to baby during childbirth. So the good news is, for those people who are in Texas and Florida, like you mentioned, where those cases are, you're not going to get it from somebody else just by being around them. But it is definitely a good idea just to sort of be aware that they're in your community so you can take the proper steps.
Should we be worried about U.S. mosquitoes coming down with malaria?
Well, so that's what's interesting here. The last time we saw malaria cases without international travel here in the United States, meaning they got it here in the U.S., 2003. So it's been quite a long time, and so it's a good idea to kind of, if you are in those areas, and just generally to take those steps to prevent mosquitoes. And so what are we talking about? Long layered clothing and loose clothing. You want to keep, all areas where you have sort of these areas of still water, meaning like just buckets of water you may have in your backyard. You want to get rid of those. And then also insect repellent, probably the biggest thing you can do anytime you go outside, especially if there are a lot of mosquitoes in your area.
Now, in these particular cases, you're saying that there was no travel to Africa or a place with malaria or known malaria?
No, and so we don't really know how they got it and why now. That's kind of the big question. There's some theories, increase in global travel, maybe some mosquitoes maybe have come here from areas where malaria is there, but also climate change. Because as the weather gets warmer and more humid, areas where mosquitoes can inhabit can actually expand, and so that's another thing we're looking at. But as far as these handful of cases go, it's probably not the climate change, but as the world gets warmer and more humid, we could start to see more of this pop up.
You're freaking me out because, okay, so now that I'm thinking about this and I'm hearing you say that the symptoms are very similar to COVID or to, the flu, and it could be dormant for a year and there was no travel. Is there a chance that we could be seeing a lot more of malaria-carrying mosquitoes in the United States than we know?
There is a chance, but, we did see this in 2003, and we hadn't really seen it since. Okay. So it could just happen. It could kind of go out like that, where we see a few handful of cases, and that's it. It is not something that is spread from person to person, unlike COVID and the flu. It is something you really need those mosquitoes. So if you take those tips we just talked about, you should be in good shape.
Dr. Optimist, thanks so very much.
Anytime.
Dr. Sayal, we'll see you. And a new in-depth examination by Reuters is revealing the family ties a lot of American leaders have to slavery. NBC's Harry Smith takes a closer look.
Thinking that this was the family place right about here?
Right about here.
We're in Portsmouth, Virginia, with Black history scholar Cassandra Newby Alexander.
Jesse Brownlee owned 3 slaves.
Remember that name, Brownlee. Slaveholding was quite common here, says Newby Alexander.
In Virginia, about 50% of the population owned slaves.
Democratic Congresswoman Julia Brownlee grew up in Virginia.
The only African-American Black individuals that I knew were the women that worked in my house, who would clean and iron and cook some.
Brownlee's worldview has evolved dramatically since then. The self-described pragmatic progressive was recently informed that several generations ago, her forebears were slaveholders.
On the one hand, I wasn't too surprised. On the other hand, when they said your great-great-grandfather had 2 slaves and a child slave, that really hit me really hard. It hit me very, very hard.
Through public documents and family records, a Reuters examination discovered at least 100 members of the last sitting Congress had direct family ancestors who were slaveholders. More than a quarter of Republicans, 8% Democrats. So too, every living American president except Donald Trump.
When you learned that, did it surprise you?
Not at all. Power is something that's often inherited, and so is privilege. And those who owned enslaved people were privileged people.
Not privileged, the enslaved. Congressman Gregory Meeks has sought his family's past for years. Records are sparse or non-existent.
I want to know now, who was that person or people that was able to survive the horrific slave trade. How did they survive, you know, being whipped and chained in slavery?
The connection to slavery seems more than an interesting historical footnote. Yet when contacted by Reuters for a response, 67 of the 100 congresspeople who are direct descendants of slaveholders had nothing to say, offered no reply.
It tells me that either they're ashamed or they don't care.
Would we be better off as a people, as an American people, if we better recognized the truth of our past?
Absolutely, unequivocally. We have to keep teaching it and putting it in front of the American people.
Harry Smith, NBC News, Portsmouth, Virginia.
And up next, if you're committing a crime, maybe don't film it and sign your own name. Officials in Italy are vowing to find the man who vandalized the Colosseum in Rome. That's just ahead, so stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back. Let's get you caught up with what's happening around the world in 80 seconds. Now, there is a lot of confusion in Russia after a failed mutiny, but in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says his forces are advancing in all directions, even calling today a happy day. And this all coming as the U.S. has said it would send $500 million worth of aid and weapons like missiles and armored vehicles to the country. And the Colosseum in Rome is nearly 2,000 years old, but now some tourist was caught on camera adding Ivan and Haley onto the wall at the famous arena. If he's identified, he faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to 15,000 euros. And investigators probably have a head start considering he already left his first name there etched in stone. And a UN investigation has found that conditions at Guantanamo Bay are cruel, inhuman, and degrading. A UN expert even saying the U.S. should apologize. 30 detainees are still held there, including men accused of being behind the September 11 attacks. And in the Philippines, police there say they have rescued almost 3,000 human trafficking victims coming from a bunch of different countries, including China and Vietnam. They were all allegedly swindled into a cybercrime group. Both the numbers of victims and the scale of the police raid were the largest in the Philippines so far this year. And in Russia, it seems like that very real challenge to Putin's regime might have been squashed, at least for now, because state media is now saying that the Russian mercenary leader behind it all, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is now in Belarus. And the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, said he was offering the Wagner Group an abandoned military base in the country. It's still unclear how many Wagner fighters have joined Prigozhin in Belarus and how many have rejoined the Russian military right now. But meanwhile, here in the United States, the Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on 4 companies and an individual connected with the Wagner Group. NBC News international correspondent Keir Simmons has more.
I think multiple things have been happening all at once here in Russia in the past 24 hours. Optically, the Kremlin has been determined to demonstrate that President Putin is in control of this country. I think that's what it was about, seeing him standing in front of thousands of security and National Guard and saying that a crisis had been averted, that they saved the motherland, that it could have been a civil war. I think seeing him sit around the table with the leaders of his security services and his armies, another way of giving that message that President Putin is still the leader. So there's that aspect. And then I think some of the details that we've heard, though, really have been quite illuminating. Hearing from the Belarus President Lukashenko talking about how on Saturday he put his army on alert, he says, and then that there were phone calls, 3, he says, laden with swear words, where he spoke to Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of that independent group of army, that group of mutineers, as President Putin has called them, and persuaded him not to continue that march towards Moscow here. And I think what that tells you is that this was as much not just a rebellion or an insurrection, but as much the lid coming off, rivalries between different people around President Putin and then others around him, like Lukashenko, trying to put the lid back on again, which it does look as if they have successfully done. And then another aspect of some of the detail that we've heard about, President Putin saying today that he, in the last year, has actually given Evgeny Prigozhin, in different ways, $2 billion. $2 billion in a year. And that really gives you an insight into how close an ally Prigozhin was to President Putin, how really this really has been about the elites around President Putin, you know, descending into this kind of this fight, really. Now, what happens next is of anyone's guess. It really is difficult to predict. We didn't predict mostly that this lid would come off on Saturday. President Putin will be looking ahead to the NATO summit in a few weeks' time, and then further ahead next year to March, when he is due to stand for election here in Russia. So there are challenges for President Putin to come, but for now, inside the walls of the Kremlin, they are probably breathing a sigh of relief, I would say.
Keir Simmons, thanks so much. Now, there's never a shortage of mysterious UFO sightings, but maybe we should all be thinking about life in our galaxy or beyond our galaxy and in our universe a little bit differently. We are going to ask theoretical physicist Michio Kaku a mind-bending question, and you want a hint on what it's about? Take a look at this.
What the hell is that? A portal! Halfway to another dimension!
Don't think we want to go that way.
All right, so if you have kids, especially teenagers, it might be time to start getting yourself ready to have that dreaded talk with them. And no, we're not talking about that talk. We are talking about social media safety and how it might be time to install some brand new parental controls. Because today, both TikTok and Meta rolled out some new features that they say will give parents a bit more say in what their teens are seeing and who they're talking to. But the catch, it's kind of complicated, and parents have to be on the apps themselves, synced with their kids' accounts, and actively monitoring what's going on. On Facebook Messenger, parents will now be able to see how much time their teen is spending on the app, as well as who's on their contact list, and they'll also be notified if their teen makes any changes to their privacy settings, like who can message them. On TikTok, a new content filtering tool is being added to its family pairing system, and that means that parents can now add up to 100 keywords or hashtags of things that they don't want their kids to see. But the big question here is, how much of an impact is this actually going to have? And joining us now to dissect this is NBC's tech reporter, David Ingram. David, thanks so much for joining us. It seems like a lot of this is focused on messages and on DMs. Who and what are they trying to protect kids from? What's at stake here?
Yeah, Gadi, there are quite a few threats, obviously, online for kids and for teens, but a lot of them do come through DMs and through messages. Think about cybersecurity threats, where there might be a phishing link, or people who may be trying to exploit someone younger by asking for photos, sending photos, trying to connect with someone who may be underage. So by limiting who can send these DMs, tech companies are trying to essentially cut off potential threats at the pass before they have a chance to reach kids and teens.
Now, when it comes to TikTok, the nature of the app is a lot different from Facebook and Instagram. So much of it centers on, like, the For You page, right? And the content that you don't need to be following or even seeking out and just pops up. How do parents keep up with all of that when they're setting restrictions? I know they can enter like 100 words, but that seems extremely tedious.
It does seem tedious, and you know, the words have to appear somehow in the description of the video or as a sticker on the video. There may be other ways that TikTok can filter out certain kinds of videos. But it is tedious. It puts a lot of work on the parents, and the words themselves aren't necessarily going to be what people want to filter out by. A lot of it's just something that's in the image itself. This was a tool that TikTok developed last year, really for other purposes. Like let's say you're an omnivore, you're starting to try out vegetarianism, and you want to filter out meat cooking. So that's a very different use case than what they're doing now. It'll be a challenge to see how it looks now.
It seems like tech companies are now passing the onus on to parents. David Ingram, thanks so much. And really quick, finally, actually, you know what? No, this is not going to be really quick at all. If you're following stuff about aliens and about UFOs and what U.S. lawmakers are saying about all of this, you know things are very confusing right now, and deep fact-checking takes time, so just know that I am working on it. But speaking of time, we always have time to talk about the biggest questions in the universe with the professor I consider to be one of the greatest minds in the universe, none other than theoretical physicist Dr. Michio Kaku. Professor, thank you so very much for joining us. I know you've been following this whole UFO, UAP, Congress finally taking things kind of seriously saga. But let's just put all that aside for today, because so much of the conversation today about UFOs seems to be centered around this idea that if they do exist, they have come from some other planet. But instead of just asking where they come from, do you think we should be asking when?
Well, first of all, journalists always say, follow the money, follow the money. We physicists say, follow the data. And previously, we didn't have much data to go by, except somebody saw something in the sky. What does that mean? Now we have hours of videotape from the United States Navy. We can measure the data from these videotapes. We now know that these objects can travel between Mach 5 and Mach 20, up to 20 times the speed of sound. They can drop 80,000 feet within a matter of a few seconds. Not only that, they can also fly underwater. We have videotapes of, yes, them diving into the oceans and then swimming underwater. Now, we don't have that capability with our rocket ships. Our rocket ships are not maneuverable like that. They can't go between Mach 5 and Mach 20 within a matter of a few seconds. But these objects are now on tape. We have videotapes of these things, and we physicists are now taking them apart frame by frame to analyze what is the state of their technology. And so far, it seems to be beyond anything that we can field with our arsenal.
So if it's beyond what we can build from our arsenal, there seems to be a bunch of different possibilities. One of them is that if they're capable of traveling this fast, they traveled across the universe. I gotta ask, do you think it's likely that we're seeing a higher intelligence coming from a different part of the universe, or is there a possibility that they may be slipping the bounds of physics or at least dimensions as we understand them today?
Well, it used to be that the burden of proof was on the eyewitness accounts. Martha, I see something in the sky. That's not a burden of proof. Now the burden of proof has shifted. Now the military has to prove that these aren't extraterrestrial. And just remember that a Saturn rocket traveling at tremendous velocities would take 70,000 years just to reach the nearby stars. And these objects apparently can navigate between star systems in less than 70,000 years, which means that there's a technology involved here that is beyond anything that we can feel here on the planet Earth. And so this is not proof. We're still analyzing these photographs, but we need more data. And for those of you out there who want to email us scientists about their sightings, we have a word of advice. The next time you are kidnapped by a flying saucer, for God's sake, steal something. A pen, a pencil, a chip, an alien technology. Steal anything, because there's no law. There's no law against stealing from an extraterrestrial civilization. And maybe we'll have bragging rights after you come back from outer space.
I can't wait to see that played in some sort of intergalactic court where it's like, well, Dr. Michio Kaku said it was okay. I want to ask a little bit more. Do you think it's more likely that that these could be possibly time travelers through, it seems like a lot of the descriptions that we hear are still relatively close to humanoid figures or using conventional shapes that we're used to. And yet, Fermi paradox, you look at all the different planets out there, you know that the composition is not like it is on Earth. What do you think is more likely, that these things are, if they are true, traveling across space or traveling across time?
Well, put it this way. On average, when we scan the heavens and look for planets circling around other stars, on average, 1 out of every star has a planet going around it. Now, within the galaxy, we're talking about tens of thousands of stars, and yet every single one of them on average apparently has a planet going around them. So how many planets are there? Therefore, we're talking about billions of planets right in our own backyard. So we can't dismiss the possibility that these objects could have a technology beyond anything we can muster. Now, traveling near the speed of light, we can't do that. But there is a theory that says that wormholes may allow us to take a shortcut through space, just like Alice would go through the looking glass to go from Wonderland to Oxford. And so that's a technology that does seem to be within the known laws of physics. But other than that, we physicists have a hard time getting our heads around the fact that if these things really are extraterrestrial, this means they can sweep across the galaxy in a blink of an eye. We can't do that.
So let's say that's true. When it comes to time travel, or I mean, you study string theory. Is there a possibility that they may be that we as three-dimensional beings that can kind of perceive this fourth dimension may not be able to see everything around us?
Well, Stephen Hawking, the cosmologist, before he passed away, said that wormholes may take us faster than the speed of light as far as space is concerned. Time travel, he was a little bit more skeptical about because of the fact that if you go backwards in time and do it repeatedly, you would create a loop and you would create enough energy to blow the whole thing apart and your time machine would explode. However, there's a fault within Stephen Hawking's proof. You see, if you go backwards in time, the river of time may fork into two rivers, in which case, when you save Abraham Lincoln from being assassinated at Ford's Theater, you've actually split the universe. So in one universe, Abraham Lincoln survived the assassination attempt. That's when the river of time forks into two rivers. In that situation, you don't have this time loop. You don't have this infinity of universes going backwards and forwards through the time loop. And then maybe, just maybe, you can go backwards in time. I wouldn't bet on it, but you can't rule it out either.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of the multiverse. And with that, we ran out of time. Dr. Michio Kaku, to be continued. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. See you in the multiverse.
Yeah, that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.